Hi again, seventh graders. We're going to go over this lesson, and I'm going to explain what you need to do for your mini research and essay at the end. So I am going to let you go over the objectives and activities, and we are going to start with the vocabulary for chapters 15 and 16 of The First Men in the Moon. So we're going to be talking about character conflicts today. So the vocab, declivity means a downward slope. Pallor is a pale or sickly complexion. Torrid is characterized by intense heat. Tumultuous means chaotic or noisy. And visage or visage, some people say, is your facial countenance or expression, what your face looks like at any given time. So, character conflicts and tension. To imagine how conflict works in a story, envision a tug-of-war match. There are two opposing sides, both pulling as hard as they can on a rope. First, one side is winning, then another side gains the lead. This is a picture of conflict. Now, imagine that the teammates on one side of the rope begin to argue with each other. This unexpected difficulty is called a plot complication, and plot complications can cause tension in a story. In the previous lesson, you examined how character contrasts are used by an author to reveal characters. Now, we will look at how the conflicting motives of Mr. Bedford and Mr. Caver are used to advance the plot, to keep the plot going in The First Men in the Moon. Okay, so more vocab in the gray box. Tension literally means to stretch tight. In literature, authors create tension in a story to bring the conflict closer to a breaking point, to make the story more interesting. So, conflict of interests. Chapter 15 opens with a scene of Mr. Bedford and Mr. Caver being led by the Selenites deeper into a cavernous chamber inside the moon. Although we don't see the two men arguing as intensely as in the previous chapters, there is still some hostility between them. Let's see if we can make an inference about the issues at the root of their bickering. So here is a scene from the story. He went on to talk of the enormous and wonderful world into which we were being taken. I realized slowly from his tone that even now he was not absolutely in despair at the prospect of going ever deeper into this inhuman planet burrow. His mind ran on. Machines and invention to the exclusion of 1,000 dark things that beset me. It wasn't that he intended to make any use of these things, he simply wanted to know them. After all, he said, this is a tremendous occasion. It is the meeting of two worlds. What are we going to see? Think of what is below us here. We shan't see much if the light isn't better, I remarked. So did you detect sarcasm in Mr. Bedford's comment about the light? What about his choice of words as he describes the cave as an inhuman planet burrow? Based on Mr. Bedford's speech here, we can infer that he is annoyed because Mr. Caver doesn't understand the misery of their situation. Think about it in the gray box. Shouldn't Mr. Caver be alarmed at the prospect of being trapped in an unknown land? Next, consider Mr. Caver's amazement at this new world that he is able to explore. Here, his inquisitive nature shines through as he eagerly pictures himself on an endless quest for knowledge. We do get a sense that Mr. Caver can be short-sighted in his thinking, however. After all, this is a tremendous occasion. It is the meeting of two worlds. What are we going to see? Think of what is below us here. But they are imprisoned. So let's keep going. To understand this buildup of conflict between Mr. Bedford and Mr. Caver, our readers should consider what were their initial reasons or motivations for coming to the moon together. In chapter 16, the reader is reminded that Mr. Bedford's only reason for venturing to the moon was to obtain material wealth or riches. So, I sat for a space puzzling over the fact that I had only just observed this until I considered the blue light in which we had been, and which had taken all the color out of the metal. And from that discovery I also started upon a train of thought that carried me wide and far. I forgot that I had just been asking what business we had in the moon. Gold. Mr. Caver, on the other hand, has never appeared to have any specific goal, other than to know whether or not it could be done. I think you'll quite admit, Caver, that you're a rather exceptional man. Oh, well, you're a rather lonely man. Have been, that is. You haven't been married. Never wanted to, but why? And you never grew richer than you happened to be? Never wanted that either. You've just rooted after knowledge. So that kind of shows that Mr. Caver's goal was mostly knowledge. Mr. Bedford's goal was pretty much gold or riches. So character conflicts affect the plot. As Mr. Caver's and Mr. Bedford's differing motives create tension between the two characters, those motives also begin to affect how each responds to their latest problem, the Selenites. Let's look at a conversation between the two where they discuss their options. Either we can attempt to make our way, fight our way if necessary, out to the exterior again, and then hunt for our sphere until we find it, or the cold of night comes to kill us. Or else... He paused. Yes, I said, though I knew what was coming. We might attempt once more to establish some sort of understanding with the minds of the people in the moon. So far as I'm concerned, it's the first. We can use this conversation to predict how each of our characters might react towards the Selenites as their story progresses. Based on what we know about Mr. Bedford's motives, we can infer that he is not interested in forming an understanding with his captors. Mr. Caver, however, is fascinated with learning more about them and does not like the idea of fighting his way out. In what ways do you, as a reader, see these conflicts play out in the action of the story? Just take a little minute to think about how you see these actions playing out or coming to a resolution. Okay, so I'm going to leave you to read the Let's Review section. And we are going to skip the multiple choice questions for now and go to the end, to the essay question. We're going to read and I'll explain to you what you need to know, what you need to do. So here's the question. Earlier in the story, an intoxicated Mr. Bedford, remember intoxicated means drunk, an intoxicated Mr. Bedford compares his own discoveries on the moon to those of Christopher Columbus. During his impromptu speech, he exclaims that the moon must be annexed as part of the white man's burden. So, part 1, your assignment for this mini research project is to gather information on the white man's burden. Now, when you Google this, you're not going to look at the movie, the poem, or the book. So what you can do is Google white man's burden meaning. Okay, if you do those words, white man's burden meaning, you'll come up with what the white man's burden actually is or actually was in the thinking of quite some time ago. Okay, so then after you look up the meaning of white man's burden, again, not the movie, poem, or book, you're going to answer these questions in complete sentences. In other words, you're just not going to write a couple of words about what it was. You're going to answer the question, what was it? So you're going to start a sentence and saying, the white man's burden was, then you're going to go on to explain. Who was a part of it? So then you're going to explain the people who were part of white man's burden. Write a complete sentence with that. What were their motivations? So in other words, why did they think that they had to do this? What motivated them to think, these people that were a part of it, what motivated them to think that they needed to take on this white man's burden? Why? In other words, why did they think they had to do it? Okay, so you're going to answer those 3 questions in complete sentences, and you're going to keep track of your sources. So don't forget when you go to a website to keep track of where you found things. Now you're going to look below in part 2 for an example of how to credit an internet source. And you must cite your sources this way. This is part of your grade on this essay. Your essay isn't just answering these 3 questions. You must cite your sources, and we'll go down below and I'll show you in a minute. But then part 2, you're going to compare the motives of those involved in the white man's burden to the motives of Mr. Bedford as he imagines himself starting a business on the moon. So in other words, compare the motives of why people thought they had to take on the white man's burden to why Mr. Bedford was thinking he needed to take on some burdens as he started a business on the moon. Okay? So you answer your 3 questions, you compare the people involved in the white man's burden to Mr. Bedford. Okay? And that's at least a few more sentences. Then you cite your sources. Okay? Here's parts of an internet citation. This was also in your course overview, so this should just be a review for you. You're going to write the author who wrote the article or whatever you're looking at on the internet. You're going to list their last name, then their first name. Okay? Sometimes there is and sometimes there isn't an author. But if I go to your website that you looked at and there is and you haven't written anything down, you're going to have to keep redoing until you get all these parts right. So might as well get it right from the beginning. Look for an author. Okay? Then you're going to write your article title. Okay, see how they wrote it in quotation marks there? Then the website title, like they went to Britannica Online for Kids, and see how they did it in italics there? And then they put the publisher of the website, the publication of the date, and they wrote the web for that they accessed it on the web. And this is the date you accessed it. Obviously, you didn't access it on the 1st of February 2014, but you do need to write at the end the date you accessed your information. Okay, so if you follow these guidelines, you will be able to get that part correct, the parts of an internet citation. Now, are you just allowed to write www.nasa.gov? No. You do have to have it in this manner. Now, if they don't have the author or article title, of course you'll have to leave that out, but I really do need you to look for that. And there is a website title. There will be the title of the website. Okay? And there'll be a publisher. You're going to have to look for it somewhere. And the dates. Okay? So that's all you have to do for this mini research on white man's burden. And if you still need any help, message me or call me, and good luck with this. Bye.